Thank you. You can hear me all right? Good. Thank you all for coming on this absolutely beautiful Sunday. I think I'm the only speaker so far to deliver their talk in costume, as it were. But I made this in the tent over there where you can make this stuff. And I couldn't give up the opportunity. How many people do their thesis in something and then get to present that research in a festival dedicated to that in the city they're currently living in costume? So I kind of went with it. Okay, so what I want to talk to you today is about some of the stories that are told about what it would look like if the world ended. And we've kind of touched on this in some of the other talks, the absolutely fantastic talks, the one that preceded me and the one yesterday on utopias. But I want to kind of bring this to the front. And I'm in a science institution. I think science is incredibly important. I also think the stories we tell are important because they form the way that we view the world. And Elsa said this really well in the talk before mine, and she said about how we're narrative-driven creatures, and that's, I think, incredibly true. So, ending the world. We've been talking and making stories about the end of civilization since there's been a civilization. So the first account, or first story that we have a record of, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it's the flood myth that occurs in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You may be more familiar with it as the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible, but there's variations of this in a lot of cultures. Hindu mythology, for example. So this has been going on for a long time, and it's continued in art and culture through the ages. Here we can see some examples from the 19th century, the 1800s, and here two paintings you can see depicting the last man on Earth, or the desolation after the end of the world. And the way in which the world ends varies. War, of course, but that was replaced with specifically nuclear war, of course, once the atomic bomb was invented and used in Hiroshima. And the nuclear thing was obviously very big in the 50s, and then again in the 80s. You don't really need to be a historian to kind of work out that pattern. The other one, of course, is climate change. And this goes back a lot further than you might think. So we think about the climate crisis right now, but it's been something that people have kind of been talking about, a sort of second ice age. And of course, the example of Waterworld, which was wonderful mid-90s film. I had the fortune when I did my PhD of studying really high-quality art. So that was special. And then you've got viruses. So this is kind of Elsa mentioned the Andromeda strain. This is the kind of another version of this. So this is a film called I Am Legend, an adaptation of the Robert Matheson novel. And in it you see, right at the start, in the prologue, you see the character of Dr. Crippen, who's cured cancer through a virus, but it all goes wrong, and it turns people into vampire zombie things that Will Smith has to kill a lot. So, you know, how it goes. Now, what's interesting to note about these visions of the world is that they are not nice places to be in. They are not utopias. They are not what Lewis was talking about yesterday, if you were here for that. They are not structured scientific rebuildings. They are horrible, brutal places. So there's a variety of violence and nastiness. Cannibalism is a common theme. Depicted in varying degrees of shall we say, vividness. If you've ever read the book The Road, that's quite a nasty one. But this isn't a new thing. This isn't something that was like in the gore films of the 70s. Actually, Lord Byron, the English poet Lord Byron, wrote a poem in 1816. And I'll just read you like 4 lines. All earth was but one thought, and that was death, immediate and inglorious, and the pang of famine fed upon all entrails. Men died, and their bones were tombless as their flesh. The meagre by the meagre were devoured. It's basically saying that people got really hungry and started eating each other. He was a wordy chap, was Byron. So the other thing, apart from cannibalism, is of course sexual violence. I'm not going to dwell on that. I don't think we need to. But there's sexual violence and sexual slavery, which is in Fury Road, Mad Max, the picture on the screen. And then there's your common and garden murder, maiming, beating people up, shooting people, that kind of thing. So you've got a lot of this violence. And this also taps into another thing that we see quite often, which is something I called in my thesis the return to primitivism trope. So you see here a film from 1952, Captive Women, which is kind of talking about what I just said about the sexual violence. But you also see here a film, an adaptation of The Time Machine. And in it, the main character goes forward in time enough that he actually goes past an apocalyptic event to a post-apocalyptic era. And in this post-apocalyptic era, there are these sort of humans who have survived, and they're living in this sort of tribal, Native American-esque kind of way of living. And again, there's a film there, Glenn and Randa, from 1971, kind of a hippie film where there's been a post-apocalyptic event, and these two living here, and they're very innocent and childlike, and they don't understand social norms, and so they walk around for most of the film naked, which is fun to watch. So you've got this idea of primitivism and this violence. So where's this coming from? What's the films trying to get at, and the novels trying to get at? Well, when this apocalyptic event happens, it doesn't just knock out the electricity grid, it also knocks out what we sometimes refer to as the social contract. Now, the social contract is simply the story we all agree to believe in so that we don't all go around killing and raping and stealing and so forth. It's the story. Laws are part of the social contract. Laws are simply stories we all agree to believe in. And there's various theories about the social contract, but post-apocalyptic fiction tends to buy in to the Hobbesian theory. So Thomas Hobbes, and you may have heard the quote, "Life is nasty, brutish, and short." That was him. So you kind of get where he's coming from, right? And he believed that human beings were essentially savage and brutal and violent and aggressive, and the only way that you could keep society together was by authoritarian rule. You had to have a strong leader, you had to have a strong set of principles, otherwise it would descend into anarchy and chaos. Okay? And this is exactly what we see happening in these post-apocalyptic films. The breakdown of the social contract, and you see this primitivism and savagery. Now, it's quite an interesting colonial kind of point of view, Hobbes living in that era, of course, that he saw people who lived in what he would deem primitive societies as savages. And so this link between going back to a tribal state and this lack of social norms, like cannibalism, cannibalism is often seen as like the worst thing, right? It's the complete breakdown of any kind of normal social interaction. So you see this, we return to this primitive state and we start eating each other because that's what savages do. So you can kind of see how these two things are linked, hopefully, anyway. So is everyone bad? Surely not. Otherwise, these films would kind of just be like horror, exploitation, torture porn stuff. So, no. Not everyone is bad. There will be a little pocket, a little community who are kind of innocent and just trying to get by, and they'll usually be oppressed by either organized or independently kind of variety of nasty people who are, stealing from them and murdering them and so forth. So you have the community. Now, if this seems, and on the image there, you might be able to kind of get see what I'm getting at. If this seems familiar and you've watched a lot of Westerns, then yes, there is a link, especially in American cinema. And it makes sense because if you're going to imagine what the world looked like in a lawless time, you'd use the example of lawlessness, which is the Wild West. So it kind of makes sense. So you've got this little community, you've got this little innocent sort of good people, or at least not actively bad people. So you've got this dualism between good and bad, good and evil. And you have this overtly in, say, The Stand by Stephen King, the novel by Stephen King, which I loved right up until the last chapter where he ruined it. And then you've also got a recent novel, The Year One by Nora Roberts, where you have like good magic and bad magic, and I didn't finish it because it was so bad. But it's there, it exists, other people like it, so, But the point is this theme of dualism, of good and evil emerging after the apocalypse as two ways the world can go is really interesting. And then you have the hero, usually an anti-hero, but he must, and it's almost always a he. Remind me to talk to you about Tank Girl later. Okay, yeah. But almost always a he, and he must save the community and overcome the bad guys and bring them to the paradise. Now, paradise, utopia maybe, in post-apocalyptic films and novels is really interesting. So especially in cinema, you have this thing where it's often pastoral, natural, Arcadian, Eden-like. It's a return to Eden, yeah? So you see at the end of Waterworld, they find the fabled dry land, and it's this tiny little tropical island, lovely, right? And then you have, in the other picture to the right of that, you have a shot from the film, which is called The Ultimate Warrior, 1975, starring Yul Brynner and Max von Sydow. It's really worth a watch. I recommend it. But at the end of that, Yul Brynner's character gets the woman who's beside him, and she's given, you can't see because it's so silhouetted, but he's holding a baby that she gave birth to like 5 minutes ago, in silence. It was, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I get sidetracked on just how ridiculously bad these films are sometimes. I gotta focus. Okay, yeah, so anyway, but the point is they're walking along the beach and they're going to another island where the seeds that they've managed to grow because there was a plague or whatever, yeah, it's an island. Really interesting variation on that. At the end of I Am Legend, sorry if you haven't seen it, gonna spoil it. The ending's rubbish anyway. What's the alternate ending? Is the woman and child get to the this place, and if you can see, it's Middle America in a capsule. You literally have the church, the army, and the flag in one shot. It's, they weren't subtle. This is right on the nose. So you've either got like this island we've got behind us is beautiful. I'm looking at it, I'm thinking this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like you've got this little island, so it's Eden, or you've got a conservative Middle American or traditional kind of way of life. What you don't have is utopias in cities. So you've got this kind of anti-urban, anti-technology, anti-modernity theme coming through here. which I think is really kind of interesting. And it's quite a conservative vision. And you see, like with the I Am Legend, medicine and technology, and with like nuclear war, it's technology's fault. They caused this, so the way out of it is to return to living in kind of this Edenic state. And I want to talk a little bit more about that at the end, actually, when I kind of bring up some of the ethics here. But very quickly, I would just like to bring up some variations, just because they're interesting. So these are 3 novels, and you do tend to get far more variation in literature than film, for reasons I could discuss at length, but I won't. So Becky Chambers' A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which is fantastic, absolutely amazing. Oh yeah, we can talk later. Yes, I've read them all. Yeah. We can fangirl later. Awesome. Okay, so they're a great series of books, and in them there are lots of different species. The humanity is part of a kind of a federation. But unlike Star Trek, humanity is a lesser species, it's like, the European Union, and Germany and France are like the big ones, and then maybe some of the smaller countries don't really have so much of a say, and they're kind of just on the periphery. It's like that, but humans are, one of the less influential countries. They kind of had to beg to get in. And they've destroyed Earth, that's why it's post-apocalyptic, and they sort of managed to escape in these space colony, like spaceships. I'm explaining it badly. Talk to the lady in the pink t-shirt. But yeah, it's really interesting that humanity did kind of survive, but they're not the kind of the big guns anymore. And then very quickly, Uglies, which sees this primitivism as revolting and rejects it completely, and technology is embraced. And then Station 11, where Shakespeare is seen as this sort of redemptive thing, and there's this traveling theatre group. I'm probably slightly short on time, so I'm just going to keep going. I'm not? Oh, okay. Well, I'll talk longer about ethics then, it's fine. Okay, so Star Trek, which I mentioned in the other talk when we were asking about utopias, which is kind of the only example I can really think in popular fiction of a utopia that actually functions. And obviously it's got its problems and so forth, but it's a really interesting example where science and exploration are embraced. And if you watch the movies to Star Trek, humanity's in a pretty bad place when they start actually moving towards the Federation and humanity as a global community and so on and so forth. So what can we learn from this stuff? Well, first of all, you have this distrust of science and technology, which I find both worrying and understandable. I find it worrying for the obvious reasons that I think if we're going to get out of this mess, science and technology are the way we're going to do it. However, it is understandable in a way. It is due to technology that, for instance, we have nuclear bombs. It's due to technology that we have a lot of things, spyware and I don't know. I had loads of examples in my head and now I can't think of a single one. Shout them out if you want. Bad examples of technology. So it's understandable that this fear that technology is going to break the world, it's going to make society unrecognizable, and we should return to simplicity. We should return to things that we kind of know. And that's I can understand why that's a tempting vision of the future. And some books have kind of explored this more intelligently. So Canticle for Leibowitz is a great example, where technology is there's an apocalypse, and in the post-apocalyptic world, technology and knowledge about technology is deliberately kept under wraps by a sort of religious organization. So Lewis Dartnell's book, The Knowledge, would definitely be on their blacklist. They do not want this. They do not want to rebuild the world. That's the whole kind of point. So it's understandable, you know, this ethical issue about technological determinism. Do we actually have control over technology? Who is it helping? Is it helping the right people, or is it only helping the rich and the powerful to become more rich and powerful? And we've seen examples from Elsa's talk and from Lewis's talk how technology is actually a good thing. But in fiction, it is generally seen, post-apocalyptic fiction, as dangerous in various ways. I guess it's a good thing that the natural world is seen as the kind of the most wonderful utopia, but that doesn't seem to actually connect with any real world things. Unfortunately, it's kind of like, well, you know, obviously that's the best thing, but, you know, on the same time I want, you know, my food delivered and I want my TV and stuff. And who amongst us would actually survive if we had to live on that island for the rest of our life? I know I wouldn't. So, you know, I need like Uber and Deliveroo to get by. So, you know. Okay, so... and going back to this Hobbesian vision of humanity as sort of savage and needing sort of to be taken care of. You can see this hero as the benevolent dictator. You can see this hero as kind of needing to take care of people. So it's a very pessimistic view of humanity, really. It's this idea that humanity kind of can't really function unless there's a kind of a paternal savior figure to come in. And I kind of feel that's a little bit what society in the West is waiting for, as if someone's going to just come in and say, it's okay, I solved it. And I don't think they are. And that's this story, this idea that the hero will save us. And I think we're very reliant on that. So that's another kind of problem with these stories, I guess. And then the most worrying thing, most ethically worrying thing, is this absolutism. So human nature cannot be changed. Therefore, if the world's going to end, that's it. It's a fixed course. We're not getting out of this. And so, shrug, what are you going to do? What's the point? It's this inevitability, and I could talk for another hour about how that links back to theology and stories in the religions that we were raised with and so forth. But to sum it up, there is an issue here with understanding the world as fundamentally doomed, and so all these stories are essentially, you know, Children of Doom is a great title for it. And if you grow up sort of absorbing that at any level, and then a scientist comes and says, you know, the world's going to end, well, yeah, you know, I know, right? I saw Waterworld. Of course the world's going to end. You know? It's okay. Kevin Costner's going to save us. Don't worry about it, you know? I'm exaggerating to make a point, right? But it's this worrying narrative about where we're going and why we're going there and who is actually responsible for saving us. And I think that's why these stories really need to be thought about and examined, and why they're important in a number of ways in terms of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as humans and what we are capable of. So, thank you.